The heroines of the following horror stories were held captive for many years by their own parents, and although all the victims survived and were released, the decades spent in captivity changed their lives forever. In 1901, the French police received an anonymous letter which said the following: "Monsieur le Procureur General, I inform you of an extremely serious situation. I am talking about an old maid who is locked up in the house of Madame Magnier. The woman has been living starving and sleeping on a rotten bedding for the past 25 years among her own filth." The letter surprised the police. They immediately arrived at the house in question, and this is what they found there. This is a real photo of the unfortunate woman who had been locked in a dark room for 25 years. The police tried to open the window sashes in the victim's room, but they were so securely sealed that they had to break them open with a crowbar. As soon as the sunlight illuminated the room, the police saw 50-year-old Mademoiselle Blanche Magnier lying on a disgusting, dirty bed. The unfortunate woman was lying completely naked on a rotting straw mattress. A kind of crust of excrement and fragments of rotting food had formed around her. The stench in the air was so strong that the police had to leave the room several times to continue their investigations. 25 years before these events, a young girl, Blanche Magnier, had fallen in love with a poor man of much lower wealth and class than her family and herself. The girl's family belonged to the very top of the middle class, and when the girl's family found out about her inappropriate relationship, the girl's mother and brother decided to end the relationship and locked Blanche up in a tiny room. When the police found Blanche locked in a dark room, she barely weighed 24 kilograms. By then, she had not seen the sun for a quarter of a century. The day after the woman's release, Blanche's mother was arrested and placed in the prison infirmary for health reasons, where she died 15 days later. Blanche's brother Marcel initially received 15 months in prison, but after Marcel appealed the sentence, the Court of Appeals decided that although Marcel knew about Blanche's imprisonment, since, according to the investigation, he had not committed any violence against the woman, he could be acquitted and released from prison. And although Blanche was later able to gain some weight, she was never able to regain her mental health. When Blanche Magnier was released, she learned that her lover had been dead for more than 15 years, which further aggravated her mental state. The girl was never able to recover from the terrible shock and died in a psychiatric hospital 13 years later, after she had been lucky enough to escape her cage. The following story is considered one of the most gruesome and cruel examples of child abuse in modern history. On November 4, 1970, a strange woman approached the Temple City, California, Department of Social Services. The woman was practically blind in both eyes, and according to her, her daughter needed medical attention. The woman's daughter, who was there at the time, had a truly eerie expression. She was walking erratically, having difficulty moving her legs and clasping her hands to her chest. She could not speak a word and had no control over her salivation. The girl hissed and spat every time someone touched her. She looked about 6 or 7 years old, but her mother stated that her daughter had turned 13 in April of this year. On the same day, the story of the 13-year-old savage received worldwide publicity. The girl's real name is still unknown. The doctors gave the pseudonym Jenny. Jeannie was born to Irene Oglesby and Clark Gray Wiley. She was the 4th child in the family. The 2 oldest children in the family died in unfortunate circumstances. The first child annoyed the father by crying and being annoyed by the noise. The father ended up locking the baby in a desk drawer in the garage for an extended period of time. The firstborn then died of pneumonia. Their second child also died as a baby, choking on his own saliva. It got to the point that the father forbade the family to communicate even in a whisper. The father took his anger out on the 3rd child, his son, and did not hesitate to use his hands. Soon the boy ran away from home, and since then he has never returned to his hometown, and that boy has been very lucky. When the last child of the family, a girl named Jenny, turned 1, the pediatrician diagnosed a possible developmental delay in the child. The father decided to shield his daughter from any contact with outsiders and locked the girl in a room on the 2nd floor of his house. During the day, he tied her to a high chair so that Jeannie could not get up and move around the room. At night, Clark would lock her in a makeshift cage made of wire, similar to a dog cage. The father would communicate with the girl without using human speech. He imitated dog barking and growling. If Jeannie tried to scream or raise her voice in any way, the father would beat her severely. The girl spent almost 13 years in these conditions. She saw no people but her crazy father. She did not learn to speak, was not toilet trained, and did not even see the sunlight. But after 12 years, the girl's mother overcame her fear of her husband, took her daughter, and took her to the hospital. The entire room consisted of only a homemade cage and a chair, with some straps and fasteners attached to the handles. When Clark Wiley, the girl's father, was charged, he committed suicide, leaving a suicide note consisting of one phrase, "You will never understand." After the girl's release, years of rehabilitation followed. At the time she was placed under medical supervision, the 13-year-old girl's intelligence was that of a 1-year-old child. However, the girl soon learned to speak a few simple words and sign language, and although Jeannie never mastered English, she was able to go to a school for children with disabilities a few years after her confinement. Now Jeannie is almost 60 years old. She doesn't need anything and is occasionally visited by her older brother John, who was lucky enough to escape from his parents' home. The world found out who Elizabeth Fritzl was in 2008, when the girl managed to free herself from the cellar in which she had been imprisoned by her father. Austrian electrician Joseph Fritzl, 24 years, held captive his own youngest daughter. In 1984, when the girl tried to escape from home, he locked 18-year-old Elizabeth in a bunker, which he set up in the basement of the house. The abuse, however, had begun long before, by locking his daughter in the basement. Fritzl declared her wanted, but later claimed to have received a letter from her. The girl is all right. She joined a religious sect and now lives on her own. The authorities have stopped looking for Elizabeth. But how could a father do this to his daughter? It was also revealed that he had been arrested for rape in the mid-60s. It should be noted that in addition to Elizabeth, Fritzl had 7 other children in the family. It is horrifying that the brutal man did not even bother to lock his victim in a remote place, but built a real prison in his own basement. The door to the dungeon where Elizabeth lived was in her father's workshop and was covered by a shelf of tools. According to the family, Fritzl was always down in the basement and did not come out for hours. During his imprisonment, Elizabeth gave birth to 7 children by his father, 3 of whom never left the cellar. Daughter Kirsten lived there for 19 years, son Stefan for 18, and youngest Felix for 5 years. One child died soon after birth. Fritzl could not afford to take him to the hospital. The other children Fritzl carried out of the basement at the age of a few months. Somehow he managed to set up the situation so that neighbors and social services believed that the prodigal daughter was giving grandchildren to her grandparents. In 2008, Elizabeth's eldest daughter Kirsten became seriously ill. Elizabeth insisted on a medical examination. Kirsten was diagnosed with severe kidney failure and the doctors demanded her medical records. The mother's presence was also required. Fritzl produced a letter from his daughter, claiming she wished to remain in the cult and didn't care about Kirsten. But the letter aroused suspicion. Fritzl, under pressure from the police and the press, brought Elizabeth to the hospital and was immediately arrested. When Elizabeth was promised that she would not return to her father, the woman recounted her 24-year imprisonment. For these heinous crimes, Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment in a special prison for the mentally ill. After her release, Elizabeth has hardly been seen in public or given interviews. Elizabeth Fritzl and her children are now known to live in another city under a different name and are doing everything they can to get back to normal life. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and write what you think about it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support is very important to me.